Busy man, Keki Mistry. He's already got a file for his next meeting. Can I take a peek what
Sure.
that file is all about, Keki?
No, no, nothing. I have lunch meetings for that.
Okay, great. So how have you been?
I've been very
Last two
good,
years have been
very good, yeah.
hectic.
Last 2 years have been hectic, but we started working from office sometime in May of 2020, end of May 2020. And initially it was 2 days a week, then it became 3 days a week. And I think sometime in probably September, October of 2020, it became 5 days a week. But what the pandemic has done, Aisha, is it has significantly increased the demand for housing.
I was just going to
And
come to that. 5 days must be 7 days now.
it,
And you must be wishing there are more hours in a day.
no, no,
Because
not.
look what's happening with real estate.
No one's wishing for another COVID, but the reality is that the sector has seen massive growth. And I think COVID has made it more imperative for most people, most families to look for a bigger and larger home. So that's one reason. Second is still I would say from 2017 till 2020, there was growth in housing. Housing was growing even at that time. But the growth was primarily coming in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. The tier 1 cities, the Mumbais, the Delhis, the Bangalores was relatively weak, particularly the center of the city where prices are high. But COVID changed all that. And then I think people realized that affordability for housing had improved dramatically. Because from 2017 till 2020, property prices went nowhere. If you were buying a property in central Mumbai in 2017 at X price, you would have got the same price in 2020. And in that period of 3 years, incomes would have risen by whatever, 8, 9% a year. So incomes had increased, property prices were where they were, and therefore affordability clearly got much better. And then the fear that there was oversupply in the market, that fear went away. So that's what caused this massive push and more people looking to buy a house.
Kiki, when last I was chatting with you, you gave me a very interesting anecdote that people don't buy houses when they're actually cheap. They start buying when property prices begin to go up. That's strange.
Aisha, that happens even in equity markets. Generally, you find that people never buy at the bottom of the market. People start buying when they start seeing prices move.
FOMO.
So this is exactly what you see even in the housing sector. So people started seeing prices move up, and that all the people who are waiting in the pipeline, hoping that prices would remain the same or hoping that prices would come lower, all these people sort of rushed forward and started looking to buy a house. So this is a natural phenomenon. It would happen in any industry.
But Keki, last 2 years, that FOMO, once you caught on to it, what was supporting you was also the fact that inflation wasn't what it is today. The fact that interest rates were extremely low, the fact that there were other states which were actually pushing and, zeroing or cutting down on stamp duty as well. So that also gave that added leg up. Now that scenario is going to change.
So Aisha, when you talk of stamp duty was for a very limited period of time. The stamp duty cut was from October, if I recall right.
3 months.
From October, 6 months. October 2020 going up to March 2021. First it was 5% was brought down to 2%, then it was increased to 3%. But in any case, it was 3% from January 21 to March 21. So that was short-lived. Interest rates, you need to understand that in that period, in that COVID period, interest rates came down significantly. Never ever in history have interest rates on a housing loan been sub 7%.
Yeah.
So even if they go up 25, 50 basis points, 75 basis points over a period of time, it still will be lower than the interest rates that historically people in India have been used to. And you talk of inflation, but what you must understand that inflation is also induced by higher wages, higher incomes. So income levels have increased significantly. If you talk to anyone in the IT industry, for example, or you talk to people in the e-commerce business, or you talk to people where they employ large numbers of staff in the financial services department, the one thing they will tell you today is that what worries them at the moment is wage inflation and attrition. So attrition is happening in a big way. Attrition means people are getting more money. There are job opportunities for people. So the feel-good factor, which is so very, very critical for demand for housing, that feel-good factor has never been as good as it is today. And I remember talking to you sometime during the pandemic, the early part of the pandemic, and it sounds odd today, but I was even at that time very optimistic. And I continue to be optimistic. So notwithstanding slightly higher property prices, notwithstanding slightly higher interest rates, possibly in future.
That slightly higher, Keki, is a very relative definition. Depends on which city you're talking
Yeah,
about.
but I shall look at it like this. You take a city like Mumbai. Land constitutes 70% on an average of the value of a property. Land is not seeing any inflation. The inflation you're seeing is in construction material. The inflation you're seeing is in cement, steel, labor, paint, all of that. So even if you look at a 20% inflation, it's 20% inflation on 30% of the cost of a project, which is not that material.
Kiki, one of the world's richest men, Elon Musk, said the other day, and it became big news, that he doesn't own a house. I mean, it's a different thing that he's looking to build a house on Mars. What would you want to say to him?
Well, I would say that for people in India, culturally, owning a house is really been, and in my view, will continue to be the single most important possession for a family. So you've seen this over the years. People said the same thing 10 years ago, that why buy a house, why not rent a house? People said the same thing 20 years ago, and people could probably say the same thing today. But the reality of the matter is that owning a house gives you that well-being, it gives you that self-satisfaction.
And security.
And most importantly, the security.
So is it continuing to be good times for real estate as an industry?
I certainly think so. I think it continues to be really very, very good times for the real estate sector.
Okay.
And I say this on the back of many things. One is affordability. I talked about it. Affordability has improved a lot. Not forget the fact that some cases prices have risen a bit. But still affordability is better than what it used to be pre-2017. Penetration level, if you see. Penetration level of mortgages in India is one of the lowest in the world. The total outstanding housing loans in India as a percentage of our GDP is less than 11%. If you look at this number in the US or the UK, it will all be in the 60s and the 70s. In India, it is only 11%. In China, it's somewhere in the mid-20s. So there is so much of under-penetration in the mortgage market that structurally the demand will remain strong. And I think what gives me the biggest belief that the growth will remain strong, Aisha, is the demographics in India. 2/3 of our population, as we know, is below 35 years of age. What people may not necessarily know is that the average age of a first-time home buyer is about 38 or 39 years. So 2/3 of our population today have not even contemplated buying a house. So look at the potential over the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years, and all these younger people will get to an age where they will necessarily have to buy a house. So I see a structural growth or structural increase in the demand for housing.
For real estate, things are good. Are things good for the Indian economy? I mean, when the prices of lemons is 130 rupees a kilo, inflation is hitting you hard. There are a lot of naysayers saying that, India is perhaps behind the curve in tackling inflation when we've still not moved on rates, when Fed has already talked about 50 bips of a hike.
All right, so let's not take aberrations. Your lemon is an aberration. Forget lemon.
It's a reality.
I know, but
it's our daily day.
But if you look at the growth of the Indian economy, I think the speed at which the Indian economy has bounced back has been truly fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And you have to give credit to the government, and you have to give credit to RBI for the way they've handled this whole crisis. RBI has ensured that right through this crisis, right through the 2020-21 period, there was always adequate liquidity in the system. So money was never a constraint. Interest rates were brought down. RBI not only brought down rates, not only ensured liquidity in the system, but also ensured that every segment of the market has access to that liquidity. So you didn't see any failures, you didn't see any, which you saw in other parts of the world. So I think we handled the economy very well. And the fact that we have this huge demographic dividend, young people, the consumption in India has been strong, continues to be strong. Wage inflation means that jobs are opening up. It means so many jobs are getting created. So, and when you talk of inflation, let's not compare India with US. I think it's a complete fallacy. It's totally wrong to do that. US historically had extremely low inflation. And India historically had higher inflation. So the gap between inflation in the US and India historically used to be more than 400 to 500 basis points. 400 basis points for sure. Today we are in a situation where US has inflation of over 8%, 8.5%. And we are expecting inflation in the next year to be, what, 5.7% or so. So we are 2.8% lower than the US. So obviously the US, because they've been used to never having inflation, has to take extremely drastic measures in terms of increasing interest rates. I truly don't believe that we are behind the curve in terms of rates. I believe there could be rate hikes during the course of the year. 2 rate hikes, 3 rate hikes, very much possible. But I don't see that, one, impacting the economy, and two, I certainly don't see the need for India to do what the US Fed is talking of doing and being so, sharp in terms of rate cuts. I think it's extremely important in an economy like ours to maintain the growth in the economy, because growth will create jobs, jobs will create income, income will lead to consumption, even if it means slightly higher inflation for some time, so be it. And you must also understand that a lot of the inflation is imported inflation. Oil was $75 a barrel. Oil is today $107 a barrel. Oil is not going to be $107 a barrel, hopefully, for the full year. So if you assume that oil settles at whatever, $90, $95, $100 on an average for the year, you're looking at inflation coming down in the course of time.
Okay. That's that on the economy. What about the state of Indian banking? We were chatting with KV Kamath just yesterday, and he said that India needs to consolidate its banking sector. If you look at countries like China, they have 4 to 5 out of their top 10 industries as banks. Do you think that's the global benchmark or a parameter or precedent that India also needs to follow, where we need 4 to 5 large banks for a population the size of us?
I think we are getting there, Aisha. If you look at things 10 or 15 or 20 years ago and look at the state of the banking, the size of the banking industry, and look at it today, it's undergone massive changes. Today, the size of the banking industry has significantly increased in the last 5-10 years. And now with the HDFC Bank merger being announced, that will, help the cause.
Since you mentioned the merger, you gave me
No, I did not. I thought you were going to bring it up, so I brought it up.
I was going to. I was just being very polite by not saying it. But now that we're at it. But what I want to understand is strategically, what is going to be the focus of the combined entity? Are you going to focus on being a wholesale bank or continue to be retail focused?
No, the bank will continue doing what it is doing, but it will have a significant share in the mortgage business now. So when the whole balance sheet of HDFC moves into the bank, and today we are growing at, I'm talking only of December numbers, I'm not talking of March numbers. In December, our individual loan book growth was 16%. The market looks extremely attractive at this point of time. Hopefully that growth number can accelerate a lot because of the cross-selling that will happen.
But KK, your mortgage book is large. That also means your margins will continue to be under pressure.
No, why would margins be under pressure? Our margins were 3.5%, if at our cost of funds. When you move into a banking structure, the cost of funds will automatically come down.
So
If
your
that comes
ROAs
down,
will continue to sustain?
Oh, of course, ROAs will continue to sustain. And it will be EPS accretive from day one. Why will it be EPS accretive? Because 21% of the shares of the bank are held by HDFC. So when we cancel this 21%, which is what the intention is, then the number of shares will come down, which means that the earnings per share will be accretive from year one, not from year two, from year one. Secondly, when we have access to the banking structure and the lower cost of funds of bank, automatically the net interest margin will also start rising. So our 3.5 logically will go higher. And when you look at growth, the growth opportunities are enormous. Then the other thing you must look at is the holding company structure. Today, HDFC operates as a mortgage business and as a financial holding company, holding equity in the bank, life insurance, asset management, so on and so forth. The unrecognized gain on our listed investments today is nearly 2.5 lakh crores. Today, I mean 31st December, 2.5 lakh crores. Out of that 2.5 lakh crores, 1.5 lakh crores is HDFC Bank. But when the market values us at nearly a 40% discount, or what they call a holding company discount. So when we become a merged entity, then 40% of this 1.5 lakh crores, which is the unrealized gain on a bank investment, will logically be an accretion to the market cap. We are talking of 60,000 crores of increase in market cap because of that. So there are so many other synergies I can talk about.
You know, the other big concern in the market also is the high weightage of the HDFC group, that's HDFC, HDFC Bank in MSCI. Is that issue sorted?
Well, to my mind, I don't see where the issue is because today HDFC shares will constitute roughly about 41 or 42% of the total shares. Today, our entire 21% is considered foreign. But when we merge into a banking structure, then only 68, I think today our foreign ownership is around 68 or 69%, only 68% of this 41% will be construed foreign. So effectively, it will open up about it will open up nearly 13% of foreign ownership in a bank. So 13% free float in the bank under the MSCI calculation goes to over 15%. And if you're looking at a 15% plus, free float, foreign free float, and you're looking at a market cap, theoretically, let's say $200 billion, you're looking at a market cap of $30 billion of foreign free float. Logically, do you think that is something which MSCI can ignore?
So your message for the shareholders is like Amir Khan, all is well.
All is well, actually.
All is well?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. You know, I remember Mr. Deepak Parekh the other day when you announced the amalgamation said that media had no whiff. He said, usually you guys are so quick on picking the buzz. And I remember Monday morning being in the studio, seeing that red flash saying, what? The amalgamation has been announced. How long have you been working on the plan?
Well, we've been working on this for probably 2.5 months. 2.5 months, but with very, very limited people being involved, extremely limited people, just 3-4 people from HDFC, 2-3 people from the bank.
Great, job well done. And I hope the stock makes up for that 20% loss.
I'm 100% sure it will.
Very good, I can see the confidence in you. Thank you so much, Mr. K.K. Mistry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr.